My oldest sister lives on drama. So now she's manipulating my children to tell her all the juicy details that goes on at my house, and she said she's going to reward my kids with toys. So I decide to set her up and make her look so stupid. My sister, who happily gave up custody of her child who she claimed would tie her down, now wants to spend time with my kids. My parents had 4 kids, 2 girls and 2 boys. My sister Gladys happens to be the firstborn child, and our parents raised us to respect those ahead of us. This gave my older sister an entitlement mentality, and she turned out very lazy with a terrible attitude as a result of it. Her character, it was flawed, and it showed up in her relationship with guys. My sister always had luck when it came to dating because guys were, rich and good-looking, were always attracted to her. But the relationship never lasted beyond 6 months, and it was a result of Gladys's attitude. It didn't matter who the guy was or how deep his pockets were. My sister was not willing to change for anybody. She felt there would always be guys fighting for the opportunity to worship her, and for some time it was true. Tragedy hit when she finally got into a relationship and was engaged. It was the longest relationship that she's ever been in, and the guy was a nice dude, from what I saw. He, however, backed out of the relationship a few weeks before the wedding, because he wasn't sure my sister was the one that he wanted to spend the rest of his days with. My sister was devastated because of the shame that it brought. My parents were ashamed and felt pity for my sister, and they did not address the issue. It was good to feel pity for her, just like I did at the time, but they should have called her attention to the fact that it was her bad character that made it impossible for a guy to want to settle down with her despite her beauty. My parents, after a few months, linked my sister up with a family friend's son who had spent most of his life overseas studying and had just got back into the States. Both families put in their efforts to make sure the relationship ended up in a marriage, and I felt it was a bad idea. There's nothing wrong in introducing 2 mature people to themselves, but putting measures in place just to make sure the relationship ended up in marriage was wrong. Nobody should be manipulated into marriage, and I met with my sister and innocently tried giving advice which I felt would be appreciated. My older sister Gladys rebuked me. She questioned what I knew about relationships and asked that I keep my opinion to myself. I knew Gladys was talking and acting from a place of desperation, but there was nothing else that I could do. I minded my business, and my sister had her first marriage a month later. I got engaged to my husband Pete 4 months after my sister's marriage, and I was living with my parents and the wedding preparations had begun when my older sister Gladys showed up one afternoon and began asking how far I've gone with the preparations. I noted that things were going great, and she demanded to be my chief bridesmaid. The request was one I could not grant because I wanted my bridesmaids to be a single lady, and my sister was married. Besides, I already had a friend whom I've chosen to take up that role. I could not just ask her to back down because my sister wanted it. Come on. I asked my sister why a married woman would be overly interested and eager in wanting to be my bridesmaid, and she said that she would be divorced before then. Oh, I was startled in the moment, and I heard her mention divorce. I looked directly at her face just to confirm that she was serious, because what would make a couple start seeking divorce just 4 months after marriage? It simply meant the issue had started before then. I asked why she was not willing to fight for her marriage, and she said things were not as they seemed with her husband. She levied all sorts of accusations on him, but I knew my sister was just making excuses. It was her bad attitude. I sympathized with Gladys on her soon-to-be divorce, but noticed that she could not feature in my wedding ceremony as the bridesmaid since the role was already taken. Gladys's reacted, and, she accused me of not putting family first, but I ignored her as I knew that she was just trying to guilt-trip me. Our parents returned home that evening to find Gladys with her belongings. They asked what she was doing at the family house, and she told them that she was done with the marriage. They were shocked just as I was and queried to know what the issue was. Gladys repeated the same thing that she had said to me. She said that her husband never supported her in the home. My parents noted it was wrong for a husband to not support his wife. They pleaded with my sister to not proceed with divorce, though. They wanted to see how they could help save my sister's marriage, as a collapse of the marriage could lead to a collapse of the relationship between the families. My parents invited our in-laws to the house, and they showed up with their son. After the guests were entertained, my father addressed the issue at hand. He thanked our in-laws for coming and then proceeded to talk about the need for peace. He then advised my sister's husband on the need for both partners in the marriage to play their roles, for the marriage to be a lasting and enjoyable one. He particularly noted the fact that a husband was to be supportive of his wife by playing the role of a provider and a protector. After my father was done, my sister's husband thanked him before going ahead to speak. He noted before everybody present that he had never failed to support his wife by doing what my father had just said. He claimed he provided and protected her, but my sister would not give him a healthy home to live in. My sister's husband pointed out the fact that he had repeatedly pleaded with my sister, who was not working, to sit up to her responsibilities at home. But there had been no changes so far, and he was fed up. After hearing his son-in-law talk about providing and protecting, my father asked my sister if her husband had ever failed once to provide, and my sister noted that he had not. My father then asked why she claimed he wasn't being supportive, and her response showed that she had absolutely zero common sense. She began talking about how her husband would come back home and refuse to join her to make dinner or help around the house. Her idea of him being supportive was for him to provide and protect and still do the chores at home. My parents looked stupid right there before their in-laws, who now saw them as people who failed to raise their daughters correctly. They apologized to them, and my father noted that his son-in-law could go ahead and take any decision he deemed fit, as they would not hold it against him. He noted that he would proceed with divorce, and my sister was unmoved. Our parents attacked my older sister the moment our in-laws left the house. They accused my sister of using her laziness to embarrass them. My sister defended herself by saying our parents were the ones who had embarrassed themselves when they played the role of matchmaker, simply because they wanted her to get married to somebody as useless as her husband. This is what I was saying from the get-go. Both families should have just let their kids know themselves better and should not have influenced their decision to either get married or not. My parents, too, have much of the blame, and they should have called out my sister when she was being all jilted by guys because of her attitude. I went ahead to get married, and my sister was offended that she was not the bridesmaid, and it was a moderate affair, and sister claimed that she was glad I had turned her down because it was not the kind of event that she would want to feature in a bridesmaid. My husband is not as rich as the men who had been crossing my sister's path. I earned more than him, but that was not an issue for either of us. We were content where we were, and I gave birth to a set of twin children, a boy and a girl, and my parents were glad that they had become grandparents. They praised me in front of the whole family for giving them grandchildren, and I think it made my older sister jealous in a way. Gladys did not get married until 5 years later, when she showed up at the house with another rich man who she claimed was her absolute soulmate. So, my parents invited me over to the house the day my older sister came to introduce her lover to the family. They wanted to make sure the decision to get married to the man was solely my sister's to avoid her heaping any form of blame on them in the future. We all listened as my sister responded to our father's question of being certain that she wanted to get married to the rich young man whose name was Oscar. My sister claimed that they were made for each other, and every man who has money is, quote, made for my sister. Ugh. My parents gave their consent, and it didn't really matter anyways because my sister was going to get married to her lover even if they refused. The marriage took place in about 3 weeks, and it was a very elaborate affair. My sister made noise about it for weeks on her social media page. Gladys became pregnant, but her husband kicked her out of the house when the pregnancy was 3 months of age. Anybody who hears what my sister's husband had done to her would be quick to judge and call him a very wicked man for kicking out a lady who was carrying his child in her womb, but I don't blame him anyways. Gladys returned to the family house, and rather than find a means to make amends, she was busy drafting up different kinds of lawsuits to file against her husband. My parents, in their unusual fashion, gathered the whole house, and I was present. My father asked what the issue was between my pregnant sister and her husband. My sister showed us several marks on her body that were indicative of the fact that her husband had beaten her. For some reason, that bordered on our house chores, and my sister had spoken back against her husband and he lost his temper. Though I don't support hitting a woman, I know my sister and how provocative she could be. My father, who knows that her laziness was the bedrock of the situation, asked her to go back and make peace with her husband. Our father went on to say that no marriage was perfect, and if everybody bailed out the moment there was a crisis, then nobody would be married. He asked her to learn from me, who has been married for 5 years without them having to settle any issues between my husband and me. I've been keeping quiet all along and did not want to wade into the conversation, as I knew my sister would be provoked if any of her younger siblings attempted to give her advice. But my sister's response to our father's statement provoked me, and I could not help but speak up. Gladys told my father that the reason I was still married to my husband, and he had not given me issues yet, was because I was much more rich than he was. But I would discover that I was married to a dog if the tables were turned, and he was the one making the money. I immediately cut in and told her that my marriage was still in place because I was intentional about it and did not create unrealistic expectations for my man to have to meet. I then mocked her by saying that the kind of man in marriage she was looking for did not exist even in her wildest of dreams. I know she's my older sister, but she's given the first blow when she disrespected my husband by calling him a dog. Our father took over the situation that was already going out of control. He told my sister that she had no option but to go and make peace with her husband. Oscar, well, because she would not be staying in the family house. My sister responded by saying that she did not plan on staying in the family house once her divorce was over, as she would be leaving with enough to keep her afloat for many years to come. My mother, who had been in agony as she listened to my older sister, asked if she felt being a single mother was going to be easy, and that's when Gladys shook us to our bones. She said that she was not planning on keeping the child. According to Gladys, the child would only tie her down and ruin her chances of ever getting married again, and she didn't want that. My parents exclaimed at the level of my sister's stupidity. I mean, come on. How could she think of abandoning her daughter because she wanted the chance to remarry? What was the point of getting married when she could not stay married? There was nothing my parents or anybody could say to change her mind. And my sister went on to give birth, and she filed for divorce but did not seek custody of the child. She did not just stop there. Alongside the file for divorce was a lawsuit of battery. The whole thing made her leave a second marriage with a huge sum of money, and she equally moved out of the house to stay on her own. She would occasionally visit the family house just to flaunt her wealth and rub it in the faces of everyone. We all ignored her, though. Things went on smoothly for everyone till my husband lost his job. I did my best to bear the burden of the family without complaining, but the pressure gradually began to settle in. I discovered I began complaining about things that I would normally overlook, and I became overly careful about wasting things. My husband did his best to understand that I was going through a lot of pressure, so whenever I started with one of my complaints, he would just ignore me. However, he lost it one day, and we had a serious argument in front of the kids. My husband and I kept malice with each other, and the atmosphere in my home began to turn toxic. My kids were on holidays, so I decided to take them to my parents' place to spend some time while my husband and I ironed issues out. I did not tell my parents about the recent development in my marriage, as I did not want to behave like my sister by bringing in a third party into our affairs. My kids were staying with my parents and siblings when my older sister Gladys showed up in her usual manner, showing up to show off. She took my kids out to get ice cream, and during their chit-chat, she discovered my husband had lost his job, and we had a constant arguments at home. Gladys mocked me behind my back while dropping my kids off, and she told my parents that the reason I dropped off my kids at their place was because my husband had lost his job, and we were finding it difficult to feed. She twisted the situation beyond what it was, and I came to pick up my kids when the holiday period was over, and my parents suddenly handed me an envelope of $3,000. They said it's to support me and my husband. This was the first time that they were ever doing such a thing, and I just wondered why. I smiled and turned down their gift, but they said that they were aware. We badly needed the money as my husband was jobless and we were finding it difficult to feed, and the situation has led us to this constant fighting. I insisted, no, we're fine, and refused the cash gift. I actually got back home with my kids and inquired which of them had told my parents about what was going on in the house, as no other person would know about it. They noted it was Gladys. If Gladys knew, then she must have gotten the information from my children. I asked which of them gave her the information, and my kids excitedly began telling me how she had taken them out and how they talked about everything, which included the happenings in my own house. Well, they even said she promised to always send cash, money, and toys whenever they told her about dramatic things going on in my home. Gladys manipulated them into believing that the only way that she would know they needed cash and toys was when they reached out to her through a shared mobile device which I had gotten them. I did not blame my children, as I knew they were being manipulated. I, however, made sure my husband and I no longer argued in the presence of the kids. It's been 3 months now, and Gladys showed up at my home yesterday to ask that I send the kids to come spend time with her during their vacation, which is next week. My sister, who gave up custody of her daughter because she, quote, would tie her down, now wants to spend so much time with my kids. I know she just wants to get some information out of them, but I will not give her the satisfaction. I told her that I would discuss it with my husband and get back to her. Update number 1. My husband and I recently fought in front of our children. I accused him of trying to flirt with their home tutor, and our kids had to witness the toxicity that came from the argument. I informed my husband that I was going to get a divorce and he could keep the kids, as I would not want to have them tie me down. I know who I remind you of, my sister Gladys. My husband responded by saying he was too done with the marriage and accused me of not having his time because of my job, and that was why he had to seek comfort somewhere else, in turn accusing me of being lazy, jobless, and unappreciative of his efforts to keep the family afloat, while he brought nothing but problems to the table. I immediately called my sister, who had been anticipating my call. I promised to discuss her request to come take the kids to spend some time with her, but with the way I sounded over the phone, it looked like she was doing me a favor by taking them. Gladys showed up at my house that afternoon, and she was at the doorstep, and I believe she heard me speaking with my lawyer over the phone about a divorce. I acted like everything was dandy at the moment, and went offline the moment I heard her knock. I'd already made sure my kids were packed up and ready to go. They were eager to leave the home, and you could tell by the way that they jumped out of their favorite aunt. Gladys asked if everything was all right, and I said yes, it's fine. I was not ready to let her into the situation of things and stuff, and besides, I was certain that she would hear it from my kids by the time they got to her place. I thanked her for coming over and pleaded with her to please let the kids stay over at her place beyond what she wanted. Gladys immediately agreed, and she left with the kids, but she called me the night to claim that she was just, quote, checking up on me. Ever since I was born, my sister Gladys had never checked up on me. I knew the only reason she was calling was because she's heard from one of my kids about the fight that my husband and I had, about the divorce that was seemingly in place, and my willingness to give up the kids. I'm pretty sure my sister would be super excited about where she is, but what she doesn't know is that the joke is on her. because everything was just an act. There's no rift between my husband and me. I informed my husband of my sister's manipulation of our kids, and we decided to put our little bickering aside to save our marriage and set my sister up. We put out a show in front of the kids so they would believe it was real and relate it to my sister that way. If they knew that we were just acting up, they would not be able to sell it to my sister. The plan is to let my sister start peddling the news because that's what she'll do. And then we're going to find the right avenue to give her a shock and embarrassment of her life. Update number 2. I knew my sister would want to make a mockery of what she thought was my situation. What I did not expect was the length that she would go just to humiliate me. I learned from my siblings that my sister was hosting a party for herself, which was a form of the reward for being a successful, dependent, hardworking woman. She demanded that everybody who was married showed up with their spouse, as she would be introducing her fiancé to the family. It was clear to my husband and me that my sister just organized the party to mock us in front of the entire family. What else would she demand that every individual come with their spouse? What has it got down to introduce her fiancé has nothing to do with it. My sister showed up at my house to formally inform me and my husband about the party. We knew where the whole thing was headed, and so we put plans to make sure that the fish swallowed the bait. Gladys asked for my husband, and when she came to the house, I informed her that he had gone out, even though it was a lie. My husband was very much around, and he was listening to our conversation. Gladys began talking about the party, and she was organizing, and how it would mean so much to her if everybody came together to celebrate. She claimed that she's been through a lot, especially in her love life, but was now at a place where everything was perfect. She just went on talking nonsense about how you have peace in your life when you find the right one, and I knew she was sending a subtle blow at me because she felt I lacked peace, since I was on the verge of divorcing. Gladys went on to ask that I come to the party with my husband, but I immediately told her that would not be possible. She asked if there's any issues, and I knew her question was not from a place of concern. I claimed that there was none, but my husband would likely be engaged on the day. My response was with a look that was suggesting of the fact that I did not care if my husband made it or not, and it further gave Gladys confirmation in the divorce lie. She just smiled and insisted that she was going to call my husband later in the day and plead with him to make time just for her party, as it meant a lot to her. I promised to show up for the party with or without my husband, and Gladys organized the so-called party just to humiliate my husband and I in the presence of everybody, but we won't let her have her way. Update number 3. Hey guys, it's been just a few days to the party, and I must confess, I've been miserable. My misery is because my kids who are in the dark about things think the worst of their father and me. I could barely wait for the party day so the whole issue would be dealt with and my kids could come home. I asked my sister to come over to the house yesterday as I had something important to discuss with her. As usual, I feigned my husband was out, and my sister, who was busy seeking drama, ran to my house. I asked if she knew a house agent, and I was hunting for one. Gladys asked if everything was all right, and I simply said I could not talk about it, but needed a house urgently. She smiled and noted that she knew a house agent whom she could link me up with. I thanked her and then went on to talk about the major reason why I even called her. I asked her if her fiancé knew about her daughter. Gladys' countenance immediately changed the moment she heard my question, and she flared up. She said that this relationship with her fiancé was a new beginning and her child was a mistake of the past, which she would not allow to ruin her chance of life of a blissful happiness. She noted that though he knew that she used to be married, she did not plan on telling him about her daughter, and would not want any family member divulging that information to him. So, I asked Gladys about what she would do when her fiancé somehow learned the truth in the future, and she claimed that they were relocating to a different state once they got married, and the chance of him discovering her past was very slim. I was pained from the inside. My older sister was still as foolish as ever. How could she be talking of a new beginning when her past would clearly show up? After her previous experiences in a relationship and marriages, why would she want to deceive a guy into marriage and expect things to end well? I was glad she was saying those things, though, as I had them on recording. I would use it to make her pay. So, I visit her previous husband, Oscar. I discovered that he had remarried and even had a boy from his current marriage. His new wife was taking care of my sister's daughter like it was her own, and my sister's daughter called her mommy. I learned from Oscar that my sister had never once visited or called to even ask about her kid. I thanked him for not being as irresponsible as my sister, and I invited him to the party. I did not tell him it was being organized by Gladys. I told him to bring along my niece so she could meet with her grandparents and extend a family, but my motive was centered on revenge. Oscar agreed to do so, and I know he would be offended that I planned on using him as a pawn in my revenge game. Update number 4. I believe my sister has finally learned her lesson. Her party was held at her home, and various family members showed up. Just as you'd imagine, she was the center of attraction. I did not show up at the same time as my husband, and that was because I was busy making sure Oscar attended the party with Gladys's child. The party went on for a while, and everybody was getting acquainted. It was not time for my sister to make her speech. She noted that the party was a way to reward herself for being an independent and hardworking woman. Gladys went on to talk about how she would be having her wedding and was sure it would be better than my marriage, which was on the brink of collapse. Everybody looked towards the direction of my husband, but we did not look embarrassed as we knew she was talking trash. She went ahead to subtly mock my husband and me in front of the entire family. My husband and I waited till Oscar showed up with my sister's kid before I decided to make a toast. I thanked everybody for coming out to celebrate the quote independent, hardworking woman. Gladys was all smiles because she felt I wanted to sing her praises, but I suddenly turned to her fiancé and told him that his lover's success was built on the success of her previous husband, whom she had used to marriage and defraud. I then pointed to Gladys's child who was standing with Oscar, and I told her fiancé that she had willingly given up her only child, simply because she wanted to live a life without responsibilities and not be accountable to anyone. My sister attempted to deny the whole thing, but it was too late. My husband was already at the DJ stand and asked the DJ to play the audio recording of my conversation with Gladys, where she called her child a, quote, mistake of the past, which she did not want to ruin her chances of a peaceful future. Everybody, including her fiancé, gasped in terror. I went on to tell everybody how my sister had been manipulating my children into getting information from them. I told everybody that I was not getting a divorce from my husband, and the things which my sister had said were all false. My sister's fiancé called her a monster and called off the engagement right there. She broke down and began crying and joy flooded all over me. I left with my husband and my kids, and we were in the process of reassuring our children that all was well and we were not getting a divorce. Oscar, on the other hand, was initially angry at me, but he let the whole thing slide, since it ended with my sister crying. My husband still job hunting, but I would not let that create toxicity in our home. So what do you guys think about the end of the story where OP's sister's fiancé calls her a monster and cuts off the engagement? In my opinion, I think he was right to do that because she was a monster. Let me know your thoughts, your opinions. Say for instance, you were in OP's shoes and you find out all this about your sister. Do you handle it the same way? Let me know your exact route and what you would do. My name's Mr. Reddito. I narrate stories every single day. If you like today's story or similar stories like that, make sure you subscribe to the channel and I'll see you guys tomorrow. But do remember, it's cool to be kind. See ya.